Hello, welcome to EST1's group project. We did a yoga study where we studied the acquisition of 3 yoga poses and video self-evaluation. Inside our group are 6 females. We are comprised of Marika, Brooke, Andrea, Chelsea, Madison, and Kate. Our 6 members all have bachelor's degrees. We are all from different areas of the United States, and we are teachers and registered behavior technicians, all hoping to become BCBAs. The study we chose was called The Effects of Video Self-Evaluation on Skill Acquisition with Yoga Poses. The purpose was to improve our accuracy of our 3 beginner poses, which were tree pose, warrior 2 pose, and downward dog pose. In the original method, there were 2 participants who were college-aged men in their 20s, and the study took place in a physical fitness center at their college. The study was comprised of a baseline, which was a minimum of 5 sessions, which was done inside the physical fitness center. The intervention was comprised of 2 different areas, which was the video self-evaluation phase and a video feedback phase. And in the results portion, both of the participants had shown an increase in their yoga acquisition skills from both the video self-evaluation phase and the video feedback phase.
So the purpose of this project was that there have been many studies that show all of the added benefits of adding yoga into your daily routine or exercise schedule. Some of these potential benefits are increasing your overall strength or flexibility, according to Tran et al. 2001. So the purpose of our study was to increase the accuracy of acquiring 3 basic beginners yoga poses using the techniques of video self-evaluation and task analysis.
We have been looking at different studies to support our yoga poses, and we were looking at self-evaluation through video. And with the studies that we found, everyone was in agreement that when you do video self-evaluation, it enhances your understanding of what you are to be doing and also your expectations. Since you know what to do, your expectations are higher. In the task analysis, we were looking at taking the complex skill of yoga and putting it down into smaller parts. And we found in football, they do the same thing. They take blocking or a header and they break it down to easier parts, not only to teach the skill, but to make sure that everyone on the football team avoids injury. Another part that we looked at of our yoga poses was the accuracy. And the supporting literature that we found was that when you do the yoga poses, it helps teach you your accuracy of that yoga pose, but it also teaches you balance, both static balance and dynamic balance, and helps with your posture. Not only does yoga help with your posture and balance, another benefit that we saw was it increases your flexibility, it increases your memory, and also concentration and attention when you learn your yoga poses.
In our replication study, we had 6 participants ranging from 24 years of age to 37, Marika, Andrea, Brooke, Kate, Madison, and myself, Chelsea. Each of the participants are currently taking graduate classes at Ball State. The setting of the study took place in each of the participants' homes. Materials used in our replication study across participants included videos of yoga positions for baseline data, a yoga mat or non-slip surface to practice yoga on, something to record with, such as a laptop or cell phone, The task analysis sheet created by the participants to accurately record data during baseline and video self-evaluation, and different communication platforms to communicate throughout the study, such as Google Hangouts, text messaging, and emailing. Our operational definitions that we created, the first one is Vriksasana, which is tree pose. It is any instance of when an individual is standing while raising their right foot up to touch their left knee, and their right knee is stretching out to the side of their body while their hands are raised above their head and their arms are next to their ears with hands pointed upwards for 30 seconds. An example of this behavior would be when Madison is holding the tree pose, standing while raising her right foot up to touch her left knee, her right knee stretching out to the side of her body, while her hands are raised above her head and her arms are next to her ears with hands pointed upward for 30 seconds. A non-example of this behavior would be Madison holding the tree pose, standing while raising her right foot up to touch her right knee, and her left knee is stretching out to the side of her body while her hands are raised above her head and her arms are next to her ears with hands pointed upward for 20 seconds. The second pose, Virabhadrasana 2, or Warrior Pose 2, is any instance of when an individual is standing with their feet spread apart, arms raised up perpendicular to their body with palms face down and head turning to the right while their right knee is bent with their right foot pointing out to the right, holding for 30 seconds. An example of this behavior would be Marika standing with her feet spread wide apart, arms raised up perpendicular to her body with palms face down, and her head turned to the right while her right knee is bent with her right foot pointing out to the right, holding for 30 seconds. A non-example of this behavior would be Marika standing with her feet together, arms raised up perpendicular to her body with palms face down, and her head turning to the right while her right knee is bent with her right foot pointing out to the right, holding for 29 seconds. Our final pose is Vanasana, or also the downward facing dog pose. This is any instance of when an individual is bent forward in the shape of a triangle with hands on the ground, with heels touching the ground, and arms parallel with the ears while their head is between their arms and the individual's eyes are looking down at the ground for 30 seconds. An example of this behavior is Brooke bent forward in the shape of a triangle with her hands on the ground, heels touching the ground, arms parallel with her ears, while her head is in between her arms and the individual's eyes are looking down at the ground for 30 seconds. A non-example of this behavior would be Brooke bent forward in the shape of a triangle with hands on the ground, heels touching the ground, and arms parallel with the ears, while her head is in between her arms and her eyes are looking up for 25 seconds.
For baseline, the participants in the study did not have any regimented workout routines prior to study, besides Kat, who had some prior yoga experience. The participants practiced the yoga postures outside of the experiment. Participants viewed a YouTube video that modeled each pose once each time before recording themselves in baseline. The participants video recorded themselves doing 3 yoga poses using the LinkedIn YouTube videos as a visual guide. The participants were randomly paired with another participant, another group member, that evaluated their current accuracy level and baseline using a task analysis for each yoga pose. All baseline was taken These were conducted in the participants' own homes for 3 sessions minimum prior to the intervention. Baseline procedures. The participants watched the modeled yoga poses on YouTube. Participants did not receive any feedback from their random assigned partner during baseline phase. Participant partner A did each pose 1 time and shared their video with researcher partner B, who then graded it using the task analysis checkoff sheet. Participants did not move on to the intervention phase until a steady baseline was established. Participants also noted at the beginning of the intervention stages at varying times in reference to when they achieve a steady baseline.
All right, so for our intervention phase, there were 2 sections to this. The assessment phase targeted behaviors that were the 3 most prevalent yoga poses. That was our warrior, our downward dog, and our tree. And again, like we said earlier, these are part of a beginner's yoga class. For the intervention phase, everyone did each of the poses once during each assessment section. And we recorded 3 sections per week. A week was defined as beginning Monday and ending Sunday. So individuals had within that time span to record 3 sessions. When recording each session, the participant used either their cell phone, where they could record using their video recording equipment, or they could use their computer. And to record, they would press record when they were beginning, and then they would press stop at the end of each pose. So for the first part of the intervention was the video self-evaluation phase, which is later referred to as the VSE phase. Every participant viewed the poses, viewed their own poses like directly after doing their poses. So they would record, then go back and watch what they had recorded of themselves on either their phone or their computer. Using their own videos, they scored themselves using the task analysis that was provided and created by each of the group members. Participants then reviewed the task analysis to make sure everyone was aware of how to accurately assess both their own and their partner's yoga poses. And there was a discussion with both partners following the scoring. If treatment fidelity dipped below 80, we had to be retrained on using the task analysis and scoring that. For the video feedback phase, none of our group members participated in this phase because we didn't need to. We all found success in the video self-evaluation phase. So the participant, we'll call them partner A, would record their yoga pose, and they would get feedback from their partner, partner B. The participant would complete a pose and send it to their researcher. The researcher then would provide feedback on each step in the task analysis by taking a picture or sending an email. Then the participant, who was partner A, would redo the pose right after receiving feedback from their partner. The maintenance was then, in the original study, followed up 2 weeks later. In our study, we did not have time to do a maintenance.
So the task analysis for tree pose begins with standing with your feet together, with your inner ankles touching, then putting your hands together while your palms are touching at the center of your chest. You then bend your left knee and move your left knee slowly upwards with the top of your knee facing up towards your chest until your left foot is aligned with your right knee. And then using your right hand, you wrap your fingers around your left ankle, and then place the bottom of your left foot on your inner right thigh with the toes of your left foot pointing towards the floor. And then keeping your hands together with your palms still pressed together, take a deep breath through your mouth and move your hands upwards above your head, and then hold for 30 seconds.
Here's the video that we used for the tree pose.
Point the toes of the left foot on the mat and let the left knee fold open to the side. Now we're going to slide the sole of the left foot either here to the ankle, a little bit higher to the calf, or if you can, just use your left hand to bring that foot even higher. As high as you can go, whatever you do, just make sure that you avoid the knee joint of that standing leg. And then bring your hands to your heart center. Let's take a big inhale and reach your hands up. So it's like growing the branches of your tree. Stay here. If you want to, you can bring your hands together in a prayer position overhead. Just do whatever feels good for you.
And then the task analysis for the downward facing dog pose begins with starting in tabletop position with your knees and palms making contact with the mat, keeping your back straight and your belly facing the mat, and then tucking your toes under where the ball of the foot is on the ground, and then breathing in and exhaling and lifting your knees away from the floor slowly, keeping your knees bent minimally and making sure your heels do not touch the floor while you reach your pelvis towards the ceiling. and push your hips and thighs towards the wall behind you and hold the pose for 30 seconds. And then bend your knees and curl your feet under your body. And then lower your back down to the floor, untuck your toes, and end back in tabletop position with your knees and palms making contact with the mat, your back straight, and your belly facing the mat.
Here's the video that we used for downward facing dog pose.
Starting in tabletop to move into downward dog pose, you want to start with your hands shoulder width apart and the knees right underneath your hips and the spine long. Tucking the toes under, press the hands into the floor and straighten the legs to come up into downward dog. For some people, the best way to do downward dog in the beginning is to keep the knees bent and to press into the floor with the hands so that your body weight moves toward your legs. And for some people, it's quite easy to straighten the hamstrings and lower the heels almost to the floor. And you can hold this with a natural breath for about 5 breaths, and then with control, smoothly.
And then the last task analysis we had was for warrior pose. And that starts with standing straight with your legs spread apart, wider than shoulder width, keeping your shoulders back and toes facing forward. And then rotate your right foot 90 degrees away from your body while you rotate your left foot 45 degrees inward towards your body, keeping your torso straight, your tailbone tucked inward towards your belly button. And then outstretch your arms at shoulder height, keeping your palms facing downward. And then look to the right and inhale, and then exhale and bend your right knee, keeping your knee aligned with your ankle and your hips and shoulders aligned. And then finally holding for 30 seconds before releasing from the pose.
Here's the video that we used for warrior pose 2.
So let's imagine that we are into the warrior 1. So again, taking care of the alignment, and from warrior 1, so just observe in 1, your hands are tall and nice, creating length in your back, and for number 2, nothing changes in your lower body. Your lower body is just grounded and stable, no movement, literally no movement. And from here, for number 2, just keep your breath really normal and bring your body away from your knee and still maintaining the knee position and the alignment, and stay here for a couple of deep breaths. For 5, 4.
For the inter-observer agreement, or IOA, each participant had a partner who evaluated the accuracy of each of the 3 yoga poses that we all did during the video recording. Since there were no participants that were involved in the study who were outside of our group, the partners were all group members who were paired at random. Each participant completed the task analysis for the session, as well as the observer themselves. And then the data was compared to determine the agreements between the observer and the participant. During IOA, it looked for 33% of the sessions being recorded. IOA was based off of scoring the number of steps correct or incorrect for the steps on the TA sheet. And then the formula for IOA was the number of agreements divided by the number of steps in the TA to get the percentage of the overall agreement. And then for treatment integrity, it was to determine a percentage of agreement on performance and calculated based off of the steps in the task analysis as the participant conducted a video self-evaluation. So as you can see, we used the treatment fidelity checklist that's pictured to the right and just marked yes or no if we went through and did those. And then the formula for the TA was calculated by using the number of agreements divided by the number of agreements plus the number of disagreements to get your total percentage.
Results time. This will show our data average, range, and graph for each participant.
So for my data, I practiced my yoga in the sequence of tree pose, warrior 2, and ending with downward dog. The tree pose was the first pose that went into intervention, followed by warrior 2, and then finally downward facing dog. After reaching a steady baseline, each of the poses went into their own intervention phases, and then each yoga position did meet mastery criteria during intervention phase. The average percent for accuracy for my tree pose in baseline was 88.3%, and in intervention or video self-evaluation, the average was 97.3%. The range of accuracy for my tree pose in baseline was 77 to 100%, and in intervention, it went to 88 to 100%. The average for accuracy for my Warrior 2 pose in baseline was 80.75%, and in intervention, the average was 96.25%. And then the range of accuracy for my Warrior 2 in baseline was 71 to 92%, and then in intervention, 85 to 100%. Finally, the average percent for accuracy for my downward facing dog in baseline was 96.8%, and in intervention, the average was 97.3%. The range of accuracy for downward dog in baseline was 92 to 100, and in intervention, 89 to 100%. For my IOA data, IOA data was taken for a minimum of 33% of all sessions done. As you can see from the table, my IOA data for tree pose was 100%. IOA data for Warrior 2 pose was 96%, and IOA data for downward facing dog was 98%.
So I went into the order for mine is I went downward dog, Warrior 2, and then tree pose based on the first couple of times trying each of the poses. I found downward dog to be the easiest one, so that's why I started with it. So in downward dog, I was able to introduce intervention in the fourth session. And my average in baseline for the downward dog was 73.88% in baseline, and my range was from 69 to 77%. And during intervention, my average was 98.2%, and between 92 and 100% at intervention for my range. I then moved on to Warrior 2 pose, which I began intervention in the fifth session. My average in baseline was 73.2, and my range was 67 to 78%. And finally, in tree pose, I did not get to intervention until my ninth session. In a baseline, it was 58.8 was my average. My range was 33 to 78%. And intervention, it was 85.5 for my average, and my range was 78 to 88%. In my IOA, I took sessions for downward dog for the 5th, 8th, and 12th session. My partner that I was paired with, we had 100% across the board for downward dog. For Warrior 2, I took it in the 5th, 8th, and 12th session. For the 5th session, we were at 100%. At the 8th session, we were at 92.8 for IOA. The 12th session, once again, was the same as the 8th. Finally, in tree, because I only was able to start tree in the 9th session, I only took IOA in the 9th and 12th session. I had across the board, my partner and I agreed at 100% IOA.
I started my yoga poses with the tree, and it took me a little bit to get some stable data in the beginning. So I started on the 6th session with that, and then I moved into the warrior pose, and then the last 2 sessions I moved into the downward facing dog. And I had in my phases, I had an average, let's see. My average for baseline was 63.8%, and then to intervention, I got to move up to a 95.6%. And with Warrior, my average was 79.9 and moved up to 100. And for Downward Dog, it was 86.1, and I got to move to 100 during the intervention. And then my range for tree was 55 to 66, and in intervention, it was 77 to 100. In baseline, it was 42 to 100 for Warrior, and then intervention was 100. And then it took me a while to get to Downward Dog, but when I finally did, I went from a 53 to 100% to a constant 100%. With my IOA, we did a really good job. My partner and I did a good job of helping each other out and getting and understanding each other and collecting the IOA data from each other. And you can see here on the slide of what we did.
All right, my data. I began with Warrior Pose, moved to Downward Dog, and landed in Tree. I have previous yoga experience. In the past, I've done it for a couple years, and I took a couple years off, so this is my first introduction back to yoga. So with Warrior Pose, I felt like it was my easiest to get together. So let me hide this. My baseline for Tree went from an average of 77% to 100% by the time that I got to the video self-evaluation phase. For my baseline phase for my baseline tree, my range was 33 to 100. And for my video self-evaluation of tree, I stayed in 100. For my baseline for Downward Dog, I started in 96% and I went up to 100% by the time I reached the video self-evaluation phase. And for the baseline for Downward Dog, I had a range of 85 to 100%. And for the video self-evaluation phase of Downward Dog, I stayed at 100%. For Warrior, for my baseline, I started at 63 and moved up to 100% as my average when I reached the video self-evaluation phase. For my baseline for Warrior, my range was 86 to 100, and my video self-evaluation for Warrior was 100. For my IOA data, Marika and I were in 100% agreement for all sessions. We had a clear layout of how to set up our camera, how long we were looking at our pose, how long we were looking at our task analysis beforehand. So we were very much in agreement in a lot of our sessions.
Okay, so for my data, my yoga poses also went in the sequence of tree pose to warrior, and then ending with the downward facing dog as well. They also went in this order for intervention. After following a steady baseline, intervention would be introduced. Each yoga pose eventually met mastery criteria, so the video modeling wasn't needed at the end. And then for my tree, the baseline average was 86%, and I was able to increase that to 100% by the end of 12 sessions. And then the range was 66 to 100 in baseline, ending in 100 to 100%. For Warrior, my average baseline was 81.4 and ended in 96%. And then my range was 64 to 93, ending in 93 to 100. And then for my Downward Dog, I started out with an 87% average in baseline and ended with a 94.6. And then my range was 77 to 100 and ended with a 92 to 100. As for the IOA data, as Andrea said, we just agreed on how to base things and how to grade things and make sure we were doing everything right. And we ended up with 100% IOA, just to show that we were doing everything the same and grading everything the same.
So for my results, I started the intervention with tree pose. my average percent in the baseline phase was 88.9%, and it increased to 98.8% in the intervention phase. And the initial range was 88.9% to 88.9%. And in the intervention, it increased to 88.9% to 100%. And then I moved on to the warrior pose, and my average baseline was 98.1%, which increased to 100% in the intervention phase. And the range went from, in baseline, 92.3% to 100%. And in the intervention, the range was 100 to 100. And then my last pose was downward facing dog, which in the baseline phase, my average was 96.9%, and it increased to 100% in the intervention phase. And the range in baseline was 92.3% to 100%, and in intervention was 100% to 100%. So for each of the 3 yoga poses, my accuracy increased and stayed pretty stable in the intervention phase. And then for IOA data, in the later sessions, we had 100% agreement for all the poses. The initial sessions for tree pose, the IOA data percentage was a little bit low, which just required reevaluating the data collection procedures and task analyses.
So our conclusions for this study was we were all able to acquire the 3 yoga moves based on having 0 experience or having a lot of experience. The self-evaluation seemed to result in stable increases in accuracy of completing the task analysis for each yoga pose for all the participants. We didn't have to go to that video feedback phase due to really low IOA. And it should be mentioned that in this study, we didn't have enough time to get to the maintenance phase because of time, but a 2-week maintenance phase would have followed. And we would also like to point out, we worked well as a group. It was using different mediums, using Google Hangouts, using a group text message. We really liked working with each other. We're going to miss working with each other, but some of us have signed up to be in classes next semester with each other due to having such a great experience with each other in this 611 yoga mastery group.
Woo!
So just some of the limitations we thought of were, as Andrea mentioned, the time constraints and how we didn't get to do the maintenance phase. And then another possible limitation was that through repeatedly attempting the yoga poses, we were learning how to do it through that rather than the intervention. And then just relying on participants' honesty with IOA, which I don't think we really had any issues with, but that's also a potential confound. And then also the task analyses not 100% matching the given yoga moves, and also ensuring treatment fidelity being 100% maintained.
Here's our list of references that we use. Our picture references. And this is the section for feedback and questions, if anyone has any for us. And here is the nice link to our project report that goes more into depth of our study.
Thank you.